Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
When my stepmom stole my wedding fund to buy her daughter a car, I thought it was the ultimate betrayal. But when my dad asked me to forgive her and even share my inheritance, I realized this was just the tip of the iceberg. What would you do if your own family didn't have your back? The moment I saw the withdrawals, my stomach dropped. I was sitting on my couch with my laptop, planning to review the wedding budget and finalize a few details. But when I logged into my wedding fund account, the balance on the screen wasn't what I expected. It was significantly lower, by tens of thousands of dollars. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe the bank had mixed up the accounts, or I'd clicked on the wrong one. But no, it was my account, and the withdrawals were very real. There were several of them, each for thousands of dollars, all made over the past few weeks. Panic set in as I frantically scrolled through the transaction history. None of the withdrawals were familiar, and they all came from branches I didn't recognize. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and called the bank, desperate for answers. The woman on the other end of the line was calm, almost maddeningly so. "Let me pull up the details for you," she said after I explained the situation. I could hear the clacking of her keyboard as I waited, clutching my phone like a lifeline. "Okay," she said finally. "I see the transactions here. They were all made in person at our local branches." "In person?" I repeated, confused. "That doesn't make sense. I didn't withdraw anything." "Were there any other authorized users on the account?" she asked. "No," I said firmly. "It's just me." That's when she started listing the dates and times of the transactions, along with the branch locations. As she spoke, a horrible realization began to dawn on me. The withdrawals lined up almost perfectly with days when Linda had borrowed my dad's car, claiming she needed to run errands. My stomach churned as the pieces clicked into place. It wasn't random fraud. This wasn't some stranger hacking into my account. This was someone I knew, someone I trusted. I hung up with the bank and sat in stunned silence for a few moments, trying to process what I just learned. Could Linda really have done this? I didn't want to believe it, but the timing, the amounts, the locations, it all pointed to her. I knew I couldn't let this slide. I drove to my dad's house, my heart pounding the entire way. Linda was in the kitchen when I arrived, casually sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't look particularly concerned. "What's the matter?" "It's about my wedding fund," I said, stepping closer. "I noticed some large withdrawals recently, ones I didn't make." For a split second, her expression flickered, but she quickly masked it with a look of feigned confusion. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, setting her mug down. But I wasn't buying it. "The dates and locations match times when you borrowed Dad's car," I said, my voice rising. "Linda, did you take my money?" She sighed, her face hardening. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms. "Yes, I took it, but it's not what you think." "What do you mean, it's not what I think?" I demanded. "You stole from me." "I borrowed it," she corrected, her tone matter of fact. "I needed the money for Sarah's car. She's been struggling to get to school and work, and I couldn't let her go without. You'll understand when you're a parent." Her words hit me like a slap. "You borrowed it? Without asking me? And now it's gone." "I was going to pay it back," she said dismissively. "But you're acting like I committed some horrible crime. Sarah needed the car. What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to ask me," I shouted. "That money was for my wedding, Linda. Do you have any idea how hard I worked for it?" She shrugged, completely unfazed. "You'll make it back. You're young, you have time." At that moment, my dad walked into the room, looking startled by the commotion. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing between us. "Linda stole my wedding fund," I said, turning to him. "She used it to buy Sarah a car." "Borrowed," Linda corrected again, her voice calm and almost condescending. My dad's face went pale. "Linda, is this true?" "Yes," she said unapologetically. "But it was for a good reason. Sarah needed the car, and I didn't want to bother you with it. Besides, it's just money. She'll earn it back." I looked at my dad, hoping, praying, that he'd take my side. But instead, he just sighed and rubbed his temples. "Linda was trying to help Sarah," he said, his voice weary. "Can't you understand that?" The betrayal hit me like a tidal wave. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My dad wasn't just excusing Linda's actions. He was defending them. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, respect, and the family dynamic that had always left me feeling like an outsider. And as much as it hurt, I knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. The room felt suffocating as Linda stood there, arms crossed, defending her actions like she'd done nothing wrong. My heart pounded in my chest, equal parts anger and disbelief swirling inside me. How could she justify stealing my wedding fund, something I'd poured years of hard work into? It wasn't stealing, Linda said, her voice calm but firm. It was an act of love. Sarah needed a car to get to school and work. What kind of mother would I be if I let her struggle? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. An act of love? I repeated, my voice shaking. You call stealing from me an act of love? That money was for my wedding, Linda. How could you even think this was okay? Linda shrugged, as if my outrage was unreasonable. You don't have kids. You wouldn't understand. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. Why didn't you just ask me? I said, my voice low but tense. Because you would have said no, Linda said bluntly. And I couldn't wait around for you to come to your senses. Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Come to my senses? I repeated, my voice rising. Do you even hear yourself? That money wasn't yours to take. How could you possibly think I'd be okay with this? Because it was for a good reason, she said, as if that settled the matter. Sarah's future is more important than a single day, don't you think? I stared at her, stunned into silence. A single day? Was that all she thought my wedding meant to me? My dad stood off to the side, looking uncomfortable, but not saying a word. I turned to him, desperate for some kind of support. Dad, please tell me you don't agree with this. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Linda was just trying to help Sarah, he said after a long pause. Can't you understand that? Help Sarah? I said, my voice trembling. At my expense? How is that fair, Dad? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not about fairness. It's about doing what's best for the family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How is stealing from me what's best for the family? I asked, my voice cracking. Linda cut in before he could answer. We're all family, she said, her tone condescending. Families help each other. I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this. It's not like you can't save the money again. Save it again? I said, my anger bubbling over. Do you have any idea how long it took me to save that money? How much I sacrificed to build that fund? And now it's just gone because you decided Sarah's car was more important than my wedding. She needed it, Linda said, unbothered by my frustration. You'll see one day, when you're a parent. Her smug tone was the final straw. Don't you dare act like this was noble or selfless, I snapped. You didn't even try to talk to me about it. You just took what wasn't yours and expect me to be okay with it. My dad stepped forward, holding up his hands as if to calm me down. Let's not blow this out of proportion, he said. The money's gone, but it's not the end of the world. We'll figure it out. I repeated, incredulous. What exactly are you going to do to figure it out, Dad? Or are you just going to keep making excuses for Linda? That's enough, Linda said sharply, her calm facade cracking for the first time. You're acting like a spoiled child who's been told no for the first time. Grow up and deal with it. Grow up. I shot back. I'm not the one stealing from my own family and justifying it with some warped sense of entitlement. The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. My dad finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. We're not going to solve anything by yelling at each other. Let's all take a step back and think about this rationally. Rationally? How was I supposed to think rationally when my dad and Linda were treating me like I was the problem? I took a step back, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. I can't do this right now, I said finally, grabbing my bag and heading for the door. Where are you going? My dad called after me. To figure out how to fix the mess Linda made, I said without turning around. As I drove away, the weight of what had just happened settled over me like a cloud. It wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, about respect, about the family dynamic that had always made me feel like an outsider. And for the first time, I wondered if this was something I could ever truly forgive. The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't quite process. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. They all swirled together, leaving me drained and unable to focus on anything else. No matter how much I tried to distract myself, my thoughts kept circling back to Linda's audacity and my dad's frustrating silence. I replayed the conversation in my head over and over again, each time becoming angrier. Linda's smug dismissal of my feelings and my dad's refusal to take a stand haunted me. How could they not see how deeply they'd hurt me? How could they justify stealing from me like it was no big deal? But the worst part was the loss of the wedding fund itself. It wasn't just money. It was years of hard work, of sacrifices, of planning for my future. And now, thanks to Linda's selfishness, it was gone. When I told my fiancé, James, what had happened, he was livid. I had barely finished explaining the situation when he cut in, his voice sharp with anger. She took the entire fund? Without asking you? Yes, I said, my voice cracking. She used it to buy Sarah a car. That money wasn't just yours, he said, his jaw tightening. It was ours. How are we supposed to trust your family after this? It was a fair question, one I didn't have an answer to. James had been so supportive throughout our engagement, always encouraging me to follow my vision for the wedding. Now he looked heartbroken, like he'd just lost something important too. We'll figure it out, I said, trying to reassure him. We'll find a way to rebuild the fund. It's not about the money, he said, shaking his head. It's about trust. If your dad can't even stand up for you in a situation like this, what does that say about how he values you? His words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. My dad's refusal to hold Linda accountable felt like a betrayal almost as deep as the theft itself. The calls from my dad started the next day. At first, I ignored them, too upset to face him. But he was persistent, leaving voicemail after voicemail, each one more frustrating than the last. Hey, it's me, he said in one message. I just wanted to talk. I think we need to let this go and move on. It's not worth tearing the family apart over. In another, he said, I know you're upset, but Linda was just trying to help Sarah. She didn't mean to hurt you. Can't we put this behind us? Every message felt like a slap in the face. How could he expect me to let it go when I was the one who had been wronged? How was I supposed to move on when the money I'd spent years saving was gone, and the person responsible showed no remorse? By the third day, I finally answered one of his calls, more out of exhaustion than anything else. What do you want, Dad? I said, my voice weary. I want to talk, he said. I want to fix this. There's nothing to fix, I said bitterly. The money's gone, and you've made it clear whose side you're on. That's not fair, he said defensively. I'm not taking sides. Not taking sides? I repeated, incredulous. You've done nothing but defend Linda since this happened. Do you even realize how much this has hurt me? He sighed, the frustration evident in his voice. I know you're upset, but holding on to this anger isn't going to help anyone. We're family, and we need to move past this. Family? I said, my voice cracking. How am I supposed to feel like part of this family when my own stepmom steals from me, and you do nothing about it? I'm trying to keep the peace, he said quietly. At that moment, I realized that keeping the peace meant protecting Linda, not me. It meant sweeping her actions under the rug and expecting me to just accept it. After hanging up, I felt even more alone than before. My dad's words echoed in my head, leaving me to question everything. Was I being unreasonable? Was I letting my anger cloud my judgment? But then I thought about Linda's dismissive attitude, about Sarah's shiny new car, about the countless hours I'd spent working and saving for a dream that had been taken from me. No, I wasn't being unreasonable. I had every right to be angry. As much as I wanted to believe that my dad would eventually see my side, deep down, I knew better. He'd chosen Linda and Sarah over me, and no amount of reasoning or pleading would change that. For the first time in my life, I started to wonder if my relationship with my dad was something I could repair, or if this betrayal had caused damage that couldn't be undone. The day I first saw Sarah's social media post about her new car, it felt like a slap in the face. I was scrolling through my feed, trying to distract myself from the mess with Linda and my dad, when Sarah's beaming face appeared on my screen. She was standing next to a shiny, brand-new car, one hand resting on the hood and the other holding up a set of keys. The caption read, "Dreams do come true. Thank you, Mom, for making this happen. #dreamcar, #blessed, #grateful. My blood boiled as I stared at the post. That car, the one Sarah was now flaunting for likes and comments, was purchased with the money I had spent years saving. My wedding fund, my hard-earned sacrifices, had been turned into her flashy new toy. Over the next few days, Sarah's post continued. There were selfies from inside the car, videos of her driving around town, and even a story about how excited she was to finally have freedom. Each post was like pouring salt into an open wound. It wasn't just the car itself that hurt. It was the way she talked about it, completely oblivious to what it had cost me. She gushed about how her mom had gone above and beyond to help her, not realizing, or perhaps not caring, that the money wasn't Linda's to give. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I texted my dad, my fingers trembling with anger as I typed. How can you let this happen? Sarah is flaunting that car everywhere, and you're just okay with it? His response came quickly, but did nothing to soothe my frustration. Sarah didn't know where the money came from. Don't take it out on her. I stared at the message, my chest tight with disbelief. Don't take it out on her? How could I not? Every time I saw her driving that car, it was a glaring reminder of what I'd lost. Unable to let it go, I called my dad. He picked up on the second ring, and before he could say anything, I launched into it. Dad, how can you sit back and let Sarah flaunt that car like it's some kind of gift from Linda? That money was stolen from me. Do you even care how this feels? Of course I care, he said, his tone defensive. But Sarah doesn't know the full story. It wouldn't be fair to blame her for this. Fair? I repeated, incredulous. Do you have any idea how unfair this entire situation is? Linda steals my wedding fund, buys Sarah a car with it, and now I'm just supposed to watch her parade around town like nothing's wrong? She's a kid, he said, as if that explained everything. She didn't ask for any of this, and I did. I snapped. I didn't ask for Linda to steal from me, Dad. I didn't ask to have my wedding plans ruined. But here we are. He sighed, the weariness in his voice only adding to my frustration. What do you want me to do? He asked. Hold Linda accountable, I said firmly. Make her fix this. At the very least, stop Sarah from flaunting that car everywhere. That's not fair to Sarah, he said again, his voice growing impatient. She doesn't deserve to have this taken out on her. And Linda didn't mean to hurt you. She was just trying to help. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Do you even hear yourself right now? I asked, my voice trembling. You're more worried about protecting Linda and Sarah's feelings than about the fact that I'm the one who's been hurt the most in all of this. It's not about choosing sides, he said. It's about keeping the family together. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. Because all you're doing is pushing me further away. After the call, I felt even more lost than before. My dad's refusal to hold Linda accountable, and his insistence on excusing Sarah's behavior, was like a knife to the heart. It was clear that no matter how much I tried to make him see my side, he was determined to defend them at all costs. Sarah's posts kept coming, each one more infuriating than the last. I started avoiding social media altogether, unable to bear the sight of her smiling face next to that car. But even offline, the reminders were everywhere. Every time I saw a similar car on the road, my stomach twisted. Every time I heard someone talk about their wedding plans, I felt a pang of sadness for what I'd lost. And every time I thought about my dad, I felt the sting of betrayal all over again. As much as I wanted to move on, the situation had created a rift I wasn't sure we could ever repair. The tension between me and my dad only escalated in the weeks following Sarah's car debut. Every conversation, we had devolved into arguments, and it seemed like no matter what I said, he was determined to defend Linda and Sarah. Worse, Linda started framing herself as the victim, painting my anger as unwarranted and my demands for accountability as unreasonable. I did what I had to do for my child, she said during one particularly heated phone call. If you were a parent, you'd understand. Her words lit a fire in me. You think this is about parenting? I snapped. This is about you stealing something that wasn't yours and acting like you're justified. I'm not a child, Linda. I work for that money. I sacrificed for it. And you took it like it meant nothing. Her sigh on the other end of the line was full of exasperation. I didn't take it because it meant nothing. I took it because Sarah needed the car more than you needed a wedding fund. You can save again. She couldn't wait. Every word she said felt like a slap. She genuinely believed she'd done nothing wrong, and her complete lack of remorse made it impossible to have a rational conversation. You didn't even ask me, I said, my voice shaking with frustration. You didn't give me a chance to say yes or no. You just decided it was yours to take. And what would you have said if I had asked, she challenged. I would have said no, because it's my money. I shot back. And that doesn't give you the right to take it behind my back. She didn't respond right away, but when she did, her voice was ice cold. You're so focused on the money that you're missing the bigger picture. This was about family. Sarah needed me, and I wasn't going to let her down just because you think your wedding is more important. Her words left me speechless. To Linda, the theft wasn't a betrayal. It was an act of love. She saw herself as a hero, a mother doing whatever it took to support her child. And anyone who disagreed, including me, was the villain. When I turned to my dad for support, I was met with more disappointment. During one of our many arguments, he threw out a word I never thought I'd hear from him. Petty. You're being petty, he said, his tone sharp. You're letting this one thing ruin our family. Why can't you just let it go? Let it go. I repeated, incredulous. Dad, she stole from me. How am I supposed to just let that go? She was trying to help Sarah, he said, as if that made everything okay. And what about me? I asked, my voice cracking. Do I not matter? Does my hard work not matter? Of course you matter, he said, but his tone lacked conviction. But this anger isn't helping anyone. It's time to move on. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My dad wasn't just excusing Linda's actions. He was blaming me for the fallout. It was like he decided the easiest way to fix things was to sweep it all under the rug and pretend nothing had happened. The more I tried to address the situation, the more isolated I felt. Linda continued to act like the victim, claiming that I was tearing the family apart with my unwillingness to forgive. Meanwhile, my dad accused me of being the problem, painting me as selfish and ungrateful. "She didn't mean to hurt you," he said during yet another exhausting phone call. "She was just trying to do what was best for Sarah. You need to stop blowing this out of proportion." "Blowing it out of proportion?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Dad, she didn't just hurt me. She betrayed me. And you're standing there defending her like what she did was okay." "It's not about taking sides," he said. "Yes, it is," I countered. "And you've already chosen hers?" The constant battles began to take a toll. Every interaction with my dad and Linda left me emotionally drained. And even when I wasn't talking to them, their words lingered in my mind. I started questioning myself, wondering if I really was being unreasonable, if I was letting my anger cloud my judgment. But then I'd think about the wedding fund, about the years I'd spent saving and planning, and the frustration would bubble back to the surface. No, I wasn't being unreasonable. What Linda had done was wrong, and the fact that she refused to see that only made it worse. The rift between us grew wider with every passing day. I stopped visiting my dad's house, unable to stomach the sight of Linda or Sarah. I avoided family events, knowing they'd be there. And as much as it hurt, I started to accept that this wasn't just a temporary conflict. It was a breaking point. The hardest part was realizing that my dad didn't seem to care about fixing things in a way that acknowledged my feelings. To him, moving on meant ignoring the betrayal and pretending everything was fine. But for me, the damage was too deep to ignore. I wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. The family I thought I could always count on was no longer the same. And I wasn't sure if we could ever go back to the way things were. Months had passed since the fallout over my wedding fund. And while the tension between my dad, Linda, and me hadn't eased, I had tried to distance myself from the situation. I wasn't attending family events anymore, and my calls with my dad had become infrequent and brief. Each conversation felt like navigating a minefield, with every step threatening to ignite another argument. Then came the phone call that shattered any hope I had of rebuilding trust. My dad called one evening, his tone uncharacteristically upbeat. "Hi, sweetheart," he said. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something important. Your stepmom and I have been updating our will." The mention of Linda immediately put me on edge. "Okay," I said cautiously. "What about it?" "Well, we've decided to split everything equally between you and Sarah," he said, as if this was the most reasonable decision in the world. I froze, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. "Wait, what?" "Everything will be split 50-50, he repeated. "We want to make sure both of you are taken care of." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I could feel my chest tightening as anger and disbelief welled up inside me. "After what Linda did, you're giving her daughter the same as me?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling. "She's your sister," he said, as if that explained everything. "And she needs help more than you do." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "She's not my sister," I said sharply. "She's Linda's daughter, and you're rewarding her for something that's already cost me so much." My dad sighed, his tone turning defensive. "It's not a reward. It's about fairness. Sarah doesn't have the same opportunities you do. She's younger, and she's still figuring things out. You've always been independent, and we're so proud of you for that. But Sarah needs help." "Fairness?" I repeated, incredulous. "How is this fair to me? I worked my ass off to save for my wedding, and Linda stole from me to give Sarah a car. Now you're telling me she gets an equal share of the inheritance? How is that remotely fair?" "You're looking at this the wrong way," he said. "This isn't about the past. It's about the future. We're trying to do what's best for everyone." "No, you're doing what's best for Linda and Sarah," I shot back. And once again, I'm the one who's supposed to just accept it. The conversation quickly spiraled into an argument. My dad kept insisting that his decision was about family unity and making sure everyone is taken care of. But to me, it felt like another betrayal. "You're rewarding her for being irresponsible," I said. "You're telling me that all my hard work and sacrifices mean nothing because Sarah needs help." "It's not like that," he said, his voice growing impatient. "We love you both equally, and this is the best way to show that." "No," I said firmly. "You don't love us equally. You love keeping Linda and Sarah happy, and you're willing to sacrifice me to do it. That's not fair, he said, his voice rising. Fair? I shot back. You want to talk about fair? Where was the fairness when Linda stole my wedding fund? Where was the fairness when Sarah got a car with my money while I was left scrambling to rebuild what I'd lost? There was a long silence on the other end of the line before my dad finally spoke. I wish you could see this from my perspective, he said quietly. We're trying to keep the family together. That's all we want. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. Because all you're doing is pushing me further away. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking with anger and heartbreak. How could my dad not see how hurtful his decision was? How could he expect me to accept being treated as an afterthought, as if my feelings didn't matter? As much as I wanted to believe that my dad's intentions were good, his actions told a different story. This wasn't about fairness or unity. It was about appeasing Linda and Sarah at my expense. The déjà vu was painful. Once again, my hard work and sacrifices were being dismissed, while Linda and Sarah's needs took priority. And once again, I was being told to let it go and move on for the sake of the family. But this time, I wasn't sure I could. The fallout from the inheritance conversation lingered for days. Every time I thought about it, my chest tightened with anger and heartbreak. My dad's decision to split everything equally between me and Sarah was a betrayal I couldn't ignore, and the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I knew I couldn't let it go. Ignoring it would only signal that I was willing to accept being treated as an afterthought, that I was okay with being sidelined for the sake of keeping Linda and Sarah happy. So I called my dad to address it head-on. Dad, we need to talk about the will, I said when he picked up. He sighed, clearly expecting this conversation. What about it? What about it? I repeated, incredulous. Dad, you're giving Sarah the same share as me after everything Linda did. How is that fair? We've already talked about this, he said, his tone weary. This isn't about the past. It's about making sure both of you are taken care of. Taken care of? I said, my voice rising. Sarah didn't earn any of this. She's getting rewarded for Linda's actions while I'm being told to suck it up. Do you even hear how wrong that is? You're overthinking this, he said. This isn't about rewards or punishments. It's about family. We want to do right by both of you. No, you want to do right by Linda and Sarah, I snapped. And you're willing to sacrifice me to do it. The conversation quickly grew heated. I laid out all the ways I felt betrayed, all the ways I'd been sidelined and ignored in favor of keeping peace with Linda and Sarah. My dad listened, but his responses were maddeningly dismissive. You're holding on to the past, he said. If you can't move on, maybe we need to rethink your share. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. Rethink my share? I asked, stunned. Are you threatening to cut me out of the will because I'm standing up for myself? It's not a threat, he said firmly. But your attitude isn't helping. If you can't accept our decision, maybe we need to reconsider how we divide things. I was speechless. My own father was essentially telling me that my place in the family was conditional, that if I didn't fall in line, I could be replaced. You're punishing me for standing up for myself, I said finally, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. You're punishing yourself, he replied. You're the one making this difficult. We've made our decision, and you're the only one who can decide how to move forward. His words felt like a slap. I had always thought of my dad as the one person I could count on, the one person who would have my back no matter what. But now, it was clear that wasn't the case. Do you even hear yourself? I said, my voice cracking. You're putting Linda and Sarah above me. You're telling me that if I don't accept being treated unfairly, I don't belong in this family. That's not what I'm saying, he said defensively. It's exactly what you're saying, I shot back. And it's the same thing you've been saying ever since Linda took my wedding fund. You don't care about what's fair. You just care about keeping them happy. The conversation ended in frustration, neither of us willing to back down. When I hung up, I felt more betrayed than ever. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what the money represented. It was about trust, respect, and the years of hard work I'd poured into building a life for myself, only to have it dismissed as irrelevant. My dad's ultimatum hung over me like a dark cloud. I couldn't stop replaying his words in my head, each one a reminder of how little my feelings seemed to matter to him. For years, I'd thought of my dad as my rock, the person who would always have my back. But now, that image was shattered. And as much as I wanted to believe we could fix things, I wasn't sure we could ever recover from this. It felt like a breaking point, a line I couldn't uncross. The ultimatum came on a day when I thought things couldn't possibly get worse. After months of simmering tension with my dad and Linda, I finally decided I couldn't stay silent about the inheritance. Every time I thought about their decision to split everything equally between me and Sarah, it felt like another twist of the knife. I needed to speak up to make them see how unfair it was. I called my dad, determined to stay calm and rational. But as soon as I brought up the will, I could sense the shift in his tone, a mix of frustration and exasperation, like he'd been waiting for this fight. Dad, I began, we need to talk about the inheritance. I can't accept the idea of splitting it equally with Sarah after everything that's happened. It doesn't feel right. He sighed heavily. We've been over this, he said. This isn't about the past. It's about making sure both of you are taken care of. Taken care of? I repeated, incredulous. Sarah hasn't worked for anything. She's been handed everything on a silver platter, including a car bought with my wedding fund. And now she gets an equal share of the inheritance? How is that fair? Fairness isn't the point, he said, his voice tightening. This is about family. Sarah's younger, and she needs more help than you do. You've always been capable of taking care of yourself. This isn't about punishing you. It's about supporting her. Punishing me? I shot back. That's exactly what this feels like, Dad. You're telling me that all my hard work, everything I've done to build a life for myself, doesn't matter. That I should just accept being treated like an afterthought because it's easier for you. His tone hardened. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. We're trying to do what's best for the family. If you can't accept this, maybe we need to rethink your share. For a moment, I couldn't speak. His words hung in the air like a heavy weight pressing down on me. Rethink my share? I finally managed to say, my voice trembling. You're punishing me for standing up for myself? You're punishing yourself, he replied, his tone cold. You're the one making this difficult. You've let your anger over the wedding fund cloud your judgment. And now you're holding the inheritance against us. This isn't helping anyone. The betrayal I felt in that moment was overwhelming. So, that's it? I asked, my voice breaking. You're choosing Linda and Sarah over me? You're telling me that if I don't fall in line, I don't deserve to be part of this family? That's not what I'm saying, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. It's exactly what you're saying, I said, my anger bubbling over. You're telling me that my feelings don't matter, that the only way to keep the peace is for me to sacrifice everything while Linda and Sarah get away with whatever they want. How is that fair, Dad? How is that love? The conversation ended shortly after that, with my dad insisting that we take some time to cool off. But there was no cooling off for me. I felt like I'd been blindsided all over again, like the betrayal of the wedding fund had just been compounded by this new revelation. I spent the rest of the day replaying the conversation in my head, each word cutting deeper than the last. My dad had always been the one person I thought I could rely on, the one person who would have my back no matter what. But now, it felt like I didn't even recognize him. When I finally told James about the ultimatum, he was furious. He's holding your inheritance over your head to shut you up, he said, his voice tight with anger. That's not just unfair. It's manipulative. I nodded, feeling the sting of tears, but refusing to let them fall. I don't know what to do, I admitted. I feel like I'm losing him, but I can't just roll over and accept this. It's not right. James took my hand, his expression softening. You have every right to feel the way you do, he said. This isn't about the money. It's about respect. And if your dad can't see that, that's on him, not you. His words brought me a small sense of comfort, but they didn't solve the larger issue. The rift between me and my dad felt insurmountable, and I wasn't sure how, or if, it could ever be repaired. For the first time, I started to seriously consider the possibility that walking away from my dad and Linda might be the only option. As much as it hurt, I couldn't keep sacrificing my own happiness and self-respect for a family that didn't seem to value me. And as the days passed, that possibility started to feel less like a choice and more like a necessity. It didn't take long for word of the inheritance drama to spread through the family. I wasn't sure who started it. Maybe my dad vented to a sibling, or Linda spun her own version of events to a relative. Either way, it wasn't long before I was fielding calls and texts from cousins, aunts, and uncles, all wanting to know what was really going on. Some were on my side, calling Linda's actions shameful and unforgivable. One of my aunts even told me, she's lucky you didn't press charges when she took your wedding fund. I can't believe your dad's enabling this. But others were less supportive. It's not like you're going to use the money right now, one cousin said. Why can't you just let it go? Family is more important than money. It was exhausting trying to explain that this wasn't about the money. It was about respect, about trust, about the principle of the matter. But no matter how many times I said it, some people just didn't get it. The fallout made holidays unbearable. Thanksgiving was the first major gathering after everything blew up, and I debated for weeks whether or not to go. In the end, I decided to show up, hoping to maintain at least some semblance of normalcy. I regretted it the moment I walked in. The tension was palpable, with half the family greeting me warmly and the other half avoiding eye contact. Linda acted like nothing had happened, chatting cheerfully with a group of relatives while Sarah sat nearby, scrolling through her phone. My dad gave me a stiff smile, but didn't say much. As dinner started, the conversations were stilted, with people tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. But by dessert, the whispers and pointed comments began. "It's a shame how money can tear families apart," one relative said loudly, glancing in my direction. "Some people just don't understand what it means to forgive," another added, earning murmurs of agreement from Linda's corner of the table. I gritted my teeth, determined not to let them get a rise out of me. But by the time the evening ended, I was emotionally drained. Christmas was worse. By then, the sides had solidified, and I could feel the weight of everyone's judgment before I even stepped into the room. Some relatives barely spoke to me, while others took every opportunity to drop thinly veiled comments about family unity and letting go of grudges. It didn't help that Sarah showed up in her new car, parking it prominently in the driveway like a trophy. Seeing it was a reminder of everything I'd lost, and it took all my strength not to leave right then and there. When one of Linda's sisters cornered me during the gift exchange, I knew I'd reached my limit. "You know, you're making things harder on yourself by holding on to this anger," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Linda didn't mean to hurt you. She was just trying to do what's best for Sarah." "By stealing my wedding fund?" I shot back, unable to keep my frustration in check. "How is that what's best for anyone but her?" She sighed, shaking her head like I was the unreasonable one. "Sometimes, you just have to look at the bigger picture. Family is more important than money." I left shortly after that, making a silent vow never to put myself through another holiday like that again. Eventually, I stopped attending family gatherings altogether. It wasn't worth the emotional toll of walking into a room where half the people viewed me as the villain and the other half pitied me. But even as I distanced myself, the pain lingered. The hardest part wasn't the judgment or the whispers. It was realizing how much I'd lost in my relationship with my dad. He had always been my rock, the person I turned to for guidance and support. But now, every conversation felt like a battle, every interaction weighed down by the unspoken tension between us. I knew he thought he was doing the right thing, trying to keep the family together. But to me, it felt like he was choosing Linda and Sarah over me, over and over again. And no matter how much I tried to make him see my side, he refused to budge. It felt like the trust we'd built over the years had been shattered, and I wasn't sure if we could ever rebuild it. As much as I wanted to believe things could go back to the way they were deep down, I knew they couldn't. The family I thought I could always count on was no longer the same. And for the first time, I started to wonder if it was worth fighting to hold on to something that was already broken. The phone call came late in the evening, just as I was beginning to unwind after a long day. Seeing my dad's name on the screen gave me a mix of hope and dread. Part of me wanted to believe he was calling to apologize, to finally acknowledge how hurtful the past few months had been. But the other part of me knew better. "Hey," I answered cautiously. "Hi, sweetheart," he said, his tone unusually soft. "I've been thinking about everything, and I wanted to talk." I sat up, gripping the phone tighter. "Okay," I said slowly. "We've been through a lot as a family," he began, "and I hate seeing us like this. I know you're upset about what happened with Linda and the inheritance, but I think it's time to forgive and move on." The words hit like a punch to the gut. "Forgive and move on?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "Dad, she stole my wedding fund. She never apologized, never showed any remorse. And now you're asking me to just let it go. Because holding on to this grudge is tearing the family apart," he said, his tone growing more firm. "I know Linda made a mistake, but she didn't do it to hurt you. She was trying to help Sarah. Can't you see that?" "What I see," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "is that every time Linda crosses a line, you defend her. Every time I stand up for myself, I'm the one who's tearing the family apart. How is that fair?" "It's not about fair," he said, his voice growing sharper. "It's about moving forward. We can't change what happened, but we can decide how we move on from here." "Move on?" I repeated, incredulous. "Dad, every time I've tried to address what Linda did, you've made excuses for her. You've blamed me for not letting it go. And now, you're asking me to forgive her without even acknowledging how much she's hurt me. You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "You're clinging to the past instead of focusing on the future. We're a family, and families forgive each other. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened, I shot back. It doesn't mean letting people walk all over you and then acting like it's fine. What Linda did wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal. And you've done nothing but enable her. There was a long pause before he spoke again. If you can't forgive her, I don't know how we move forward, he said quietly. His words felt like the final straw, a line I couldn't uncross. You've made your choice, Dad, I said, my voice breaking. And now I'm making mine. I'm done being the scapegoat. I'm done pretending like this is okay. If this is what family means to you, then maybe I don't belong in it. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. You don't mean that, he said. I wish I didn't, I replied, tears streaming down my face. But I can't keep sacrificing myself for a family that doesn't value me. I love you, Dad, but love isn't enough. Not when it comes at this cost. I hung up before he could respond, my hands trembling as I set the phone down. The weight of what I'd just done settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and final. In the days that followed, I replayed the conversation over and over in my head, second-guessing myself at every turn. Had I been too harsh? Had I given up too soon? But every time I thought about Linda's actions, my dad's excuses, and the way they'd both dismiss my feelings, I knew I'd made the right decision. Walking away wasn't easy. It felt like ripping out a part of myself, leaving behind a version of my family that no longer existed. But it also felt like setting a boundary, one that was long overdue. I haven't spoken to my dad, Linda, or Sarah since that night. I miss my dad every day, but I've come to realize that love alone isn't enough to sustain a relationship. Respect, trust, and accountability matter too. And while walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done, it was also the first step toward reclaiming my peace. Sometimes the only way to heal is to let go of the people who keep reopening your wounds.